The historic mandate that the Modi government won when re-elected earlier this year may have put a lid on opposition questions on unemployment. But does that mean the issue has truly been put to rest? Data from the NSSO that was finally released post-elections has confirmed claims that unemployment rates could be the highest in 45 years. The government says this data is not comparable, so that 45-year figure is not necessarily correct. But again, it doesn't take away from the problem. So what can Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharam do on the jobs front in her maiden budget? What are the expectations? To speak on this, I am joined today by the best voices possible on this space. Pradeep Bhargav, a former chairman, CII, National Committee on Industrial Relations. Manish Sabarwal, chairman and co-founder of TeamLease, and R. Jagannathan, editorial director at Swaraj magazine. Welcome to all of you and thank you for speaking with us today. Manish, let me begin by getting your view on what the issue truly is. Now, I know there are two refrains whenever we talk about unemployment. One is that this NSSO data should not be looked at in comparison to earlier figures. So let's put that aside. The second is that we don't have a jobs problem, we have a wage problem. How do you look at the problem?
No, I'm quite clear that our official unemployment rate is not a fudge, but that's the wrong problem, right? Anybody who wants a job has a job, they just don't have the wages they want or the wages they need. Our problem is not unemployment, it's employed poverty. And, while you may say 45 years, but, since independence, India's unemployment had bounced in the narrow range of between 4 and 6%, and that's where it continues to be. But I think that we are still a poor country. So while only 4% may be unemployed, maybe 26% are in poverty. So poverty is about productivity. So I think that our problem, because if you think we have a jobs problem, you'll throw money from helicopters, you'll mandate a 3-day work week. You'll take away people's shovels or tractors and give them spoons in agriculture. But if you think it's a wages problem, you'll do many different things. You'll do financialization, formalization, urbanization, industrialization, and human capital.
So let's start with that premise. Let me begin with that point before we move ahead to solutions. Mr. Bhargav, do you believe it's a wages problem rather than a jobs problem? Because to speak on solutions, we must first identify what the problem is, which is, I expect, what the Finance Ministry has also been doing.
Yeah, most certainly I would agree with Manish, who is quite Maharshi on this aspect of what is the problem, and I fully concur with him. The issue is that of the, large percentage of self-employed people, most of them are underpaid, most of them are struggling for things. This is a makeshift arrangement. So yes, it is a question of getting wages. It is a question of getting full employment. It's a question of getting social security. It's a question of having a certainty on that employment. I think we are plagued with all these issues concurrently. Yes, there are those who are in the formal sector, whether it's government or private sector, they are pretty comfortable. And I'm not grudging that. But our major problem of 47 crores people in the workforce, there's a small, very, very small percentage on the thing, most of them are employed. So yes, I agree with Tamanna that it is as much an issue or primarily an issue of having gainful, sustained employment with decent, livable, sustainable wages.
Okay, so now the question is that, there's about 1 million Indians who enter the job market every year. Jaggi, I assume you largely agree that it's a wages issue, not so much a work issue. But then what are we doing to improve the quality of work? I mean, your urban myths are very common, where you have, an overqualified person doing a job that he necessarily did not train for. You have an auto driver who's an MBA and stories like that. We've all heard about it. Where do you think the crux of the issue is?
I think two things. I think we are moving probably in the right direction on the formalization thing. Where we are not doing very well is on the urbanization thing, where we are having very poor quality urbanization. Urbanization is key to creating higher quality jobs, with better paying jobs, and that's what we are not doing well, because our urban areas are run like rural such thing. Our real issue, at some point we have to get fixing the regulatory problems regarding labor, which I think is started being eased. I mean, we have changed the Apprentices Act, but we are nowhere doing the kind of millions of apprentices that Germany would do. If a small country like Germany can do it, why are we doing just a few lakhs? So that somewhere something there is a problem there. Either the Apprentices Act wages are too low, or they are not, or companies are not incentivized to take it on. The second thing is labor law itself needs changing. The government has started moving at the fringes by allowing fixed term labor contracts and other things, but industry, unfortunately, just when these things are being eased, is going through its deleveraging problem. They are not in a mood to hire. They have a investment problem. All kinds of things are happening. So I think it's a time of bad timing in terms of just when the things are getting better, industry is yet not in a position to invest and create those kind of high quality jobs. So it's, I think in the next few years you will see huge changes, especially if you start speeding up changes in the factor markets, especially land and labor. Once these two things are done and we invest in the right kind of urbanization, our jobs should take off vertically, even on the wages front.
Okay, so let's look at the time span we need to do all of this and the steps going forward. Bring it back to the budget hook, and let me come again to Manish Sabarwal. Do you think that this is an issue that can be addressed in the budget, or is it more connected to core issues like kickstarting the economy, increasing private investments? If businesses do better, then they will employ more and perhaps increase wages.
No, I mean, I think the budget has to make the down payments on structural changes. I mean, obviously, as India has moved to GST, the budget becomes less important in many ways, but in some ways, the budget is always used as a policy statement. And I think, we have too many people in the wrong geographies. Karnataka has 1/4 the number of people than UP, but still has the same GDP. We have too many people in unproductive firms. Our 6.3 crore enterprises only translate to 19,500 companies with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. We have too many people in farming. Half our labor force produces only 14% of our GDP, and we have too many people with poor skills. So the agenda is clear. You fix urbanization. 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister for that. So we need to decentralize for urbanization and fix urbanization. We need to make doing business much easier. There are 57,000 compliances, 3,100 filings, which change 5,000 times a year even today for corporate India. Now, one company may not be subject to that, but the regulatory cholesterol has to go away, and the budget has to make a very clear statement that the number of compliances, the number of filings, and the number of changes can't be at these just dystopian sort of levels. And then, of course, I think in tune with formalization, the budget can do a lot on financialization. India's credit to GDP ratio is 50%. Most rich countries are 100%. I think China's 300% credit to GDP is wrong. And for that, we need more bank licenses. We need to solve the NBFC problem. But financialization cycle, which has begun in the last 2-3 years, needs to be taken to the next level, and the budget plays an important part in that. And I would love to see stuff on the regulatory cholesterol in labor laws and land.
I love the way you term
while
it.
there is some such thing as India's capital market, and India's capital markets.
Yeah, I love that term, regulatory cholesterol. I'm totally going to pinch it with due credit to you, Mr. Sabarwal. But I just want to come to you for one more point on labor law. There has been, of course, a new labor code which is in the works, which largely looks at streamlining all the laws into 4 key heads. There are already some noises saying that it shouldn't turn into a hire and fire policy. Yes. The government has said, no, it won't turn into a hire and fire policy. What you're talking about requires not just political will, it needs a Teflon coating, a political Teflon coating to be able to tweak labor laws like that. Do you think this government has that?
I think that the 67% turnout in voting and the results that we got reflects a more aspirational India. It reflects a younger India. And younger Indians don't care about preserving jobs, they care about creating jobs. So I think that whenever you preserve labor laws, you focus on the geriatric ward, which say the board of EPFO is, or the board of ESI is, or trade unions are. But India is not a geriatric ward. 65% of Indians are less than 35 years old. They don't care about preserving jobs, they care about creating them. So I'm not sure it's as bad politics as you make it out to be. It traditionally has been, because we've had these small numbers of people. It's been minority rule, right, where a small formal sector sort of kept the informal sector informal. But once we have made formalization our priority, without fixing labor laws, you will never have the kind of job creation at the scale that India needs.
Okay, fantastic. Let me come to Mr. Bhargav for his take on that, and I'll start with a simple, what do you think can be done in the budget to address the unemployment issue?
Yeah, let me just react to the cholesterol and the Teflons. It is true, we do need to take the tough stand, and it is true that there is a minority which is holding the majority of the people to get into formal sector, which means we need labor reforms. Tamanna, we need those labor reforms irrespective of what the government spends or doesn't spend. Coming to the budget. Now, budget, as we have been talking about after GST and after major funds revolving into the states, has become an expenditure budget. In this expenditure budget, the government will have to, at this point of time, do considerable amount of investment, not the investment which is job oriented like Manrega, but investment which is growth oriented. Well, we've talked about, everybody's talked about get into construction, get into garments, get into food processing, get into all the stuff which is the right nature, tourism. I think that needs to be done. But equally important, while the government does all this, government's budget is also going to be an indication, along with the reforms, that what others need to spend. Government will spend a significant amount, whatever is available, and for that to happen, government has to identify, in my opinion, certain finite sectors which are labor intensive, whether it's again giving boost to those sectors through incentives and otherwise. Government expenditure in infrastructure certainly will give to first, second, third order of employment. Government encouraging certain labor intensive industries through things will give investment and also job employment. So budget is important. I don't want to belittle the contribution of budget, because this is the first statement coming, Tamanna, from this government after they got back to power. We need both.
Okay, Jaggi, a few interesting things about policies we've seen from this government so far, and I want to bring in PM Kisan here. Though it's focused on farmers, it is in a sense some form of an income support scheme. Then the scheme to extend pension support to informal labor as well. What is the direction you see the government heading in on employment, and what do you hope to see in the budget?
See, I think if you've seen the trend in the last two major budgets, two things were done. One was subsidization of formalization, that is the government pays a part of the PF contributions so that employers can hire more. Then you had fixed term labor contracts that have been extended now to all sectors. So this budget, I would expect one more thing to happen. I think incentivization for hiring more women labor, because the female labor participation rate has been crashing for quite a while now and is down to below 20% if you look at it at the national picture. So that's very poor. So I think that will get incentivized. I think the real issue is really to do with how fast they can speed up the factor market reforms. And I think the budget also needs to do some more things. I think one of the things they did outside the budget, that is they reduced the ESI contributions from 6.5 to 4%. I think they should just abolish the whole scheme and probably put every worker on some kind of a Ayushman Bharat issue and say, okay, get on with it. I think this business of trying to have yet another, failing kind of a medical insurance scheme just by reducing the thing, I think it just needs to be abolished. I think that would be a far better way to get people enthused about their net take-home pay than to try and reduce their employers to. It's a restriction on employers to hire more because they still have to pay 3.5% or whatever it is. So I think they should just abolish the IESI scheme and put everybody on a free Ayushman Bharat
But I'm sorry, Jaggi, we don't know how Ayushman Bharat works so far. And Ayushman Bharat is for a certain segment. There is a threshold. It's still in the process of rolling out. Do you think it's fair to say let's cut back on insurance which is in the system? It's debatable whether it works or not. But do you think it's fair to cut back and say, okay, put them on Ayushman Bharat? Ayushman Bharat is still untested.
Yeah. Right. No. I mean, the government can have a subsidized form of insurance scheme for workers that does not need either the employer or the worker to pay. So below, it's only covering workers below a certain level of pay. So I don't see why you need that scheme at all, because ESI is the most inefficient kind of medical insurance you can ever have in this country. So I think it doesn't make sense. Let them earn their bread by actually showing that they can improve service levels and other things and bring down their costs. I think that, and the other thing you asked a little about PM Kisan Samman. I think it's a good idea, because once you have a certain minimum level of income coming into the farm sector, it allows more of them to move to the cities or elsewhere in search of wage employment without having to stay stuck on the farm, because the money anyway drops into their account. So I think that's probably a good scheme up to a certain level.
Manish, you want to come in on that, on some of Jaggi's recommendations on ESIS?
No, I think ESI doesn't have clients, it has hostages, right? I mean, it has sitting on 75,000 crores of cash. It is only a 50% contribution ratio, so it has been the world's most expensive health insurance program for the last 20 years. So I think absolutely, but I do think the reform of cutting contribution was a great move. Now, whether ESI can be put into Ayushman Bharat, I don't know, but clearly the gap between gross salary and net salary for low wage employees. So if somebody gets 20,000 rupees a month, we have, as an employer, have to keep 40% of his salary for EPS, EPFO, EDLI, ESI, Labour Welfare Board.
Yeah.
While if you have a 50,000 rupee salary, I only have to keep 9%. So I think this, what people say, haath wali salary versus chitti wali salary gap is something that the budget could address, because that just seems to be, it's among the world's highest payroll confiscation, and in today's world a 40% payroll confiscation just doesn't recognize what employment is, how the employment contract has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. So if the budget could do something which includes EPFO, EDLI and other reform, it would be to reduce the gap between haath wali salary and chitti wali salary.
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of our viewers watching this will agree with that, that there should be more clarity on what you're really getting out of that 40% confiscation. Pradeep, I want to get your thoughts on the comments made, but I also want to come on a very important part when we speak about unemployment, which is skill development. And if there is one area that I think most people would agree that this government has maybe attempted but not really made much headway on, is skill development. It was a big focus area in 2014. In 2019, we're still wondering what to do with this mass of unskilled or underskilled people who come into the job market. There are jobs, but they're just not fit for it.
Yeah. So Tamanna, if I could bring a little perspective, every time we discuss budget or thing, we always tell what the government should be doing, whether it's GST, whether it's an RBI. I think we as citizens, we as corporates have as much responsibility towards the budget, employment, jobs in this country. Skill development is a classic case. Government will do only finite. How many of our industries themselves are willing to collaborate with educational institution, skill institution? I've been involved in this journey for the last 15 years, and the bigger disappointment is not from the government but from us industry. We do anything to develop a vendor for our products. We'll do anything to develop a relationship with a banker, but we don't do anything to develop a relationship with the most important critical input that we need is human resources. So Tamanna, it's as much our responsibility to be able to go through this journey of skill development. And frankly, if I could just extend with your permission,
yes,
even in this whole business of invest in employment, please understand government will do only so much. President Xi and President Moon don't go around selling their products for their country and things. It's aggressive entrepreneurs who do it. We need to start realizing that we as industry also need to contribute to this whole journey of investment and employment. We need to be more assertive, we need to be more efficient, we need to be more innovative. So I think every time we put our charter of demand. Let's be a little more Nirmal to Nirmala Sitharam.
Yeah.
Let's start owning up certain responsibility, be it in skill development, be it in creating jobs. We need to be doing a lot more.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But I think it's only fair. We're speaking just a few days before the budget. It's the maiden budget. The wish lists are already out there, and that's why we're trying to get some of those views in together. Manish Sabarwal, just very, very quickly, if you had to identify just 2 or 3 things that can set in motion, some movement on the employment situation. So far, and at least in term 1, the focus has been on people generating jobs by creating small businesses of their own. Now, that can go only to some extent, because not everyone can start a business, because then who will they employ? So, do you think it's important to sort of change tack there?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think if they reduce regulatory cholesterol, 57,000 compliances, 3,100 filings, which change 5,000 times a year, may work for big companies. They don't work for small ones. They certainly don't add to formalization. So I think a massive attack on regulatory cholesterol would be great. I think staying the course on fiscal discipline, which will bring interest rates down. Interest rates have started coming down, but interest rates are a very important part of the capex cycle. So bringing interest rates down. And the third, which I think would make a huge difference, because we now are about 100 to 125 million people in the formal sector. Out of the 500 million, the difference between gross salary, net salary, haath wali salary versus chitti salary would also make a huge difference to getting sort of the formalization of jobs going. We don't have a jobs problem, we have a formal jobs problem. So what kickstarts formal jobs is often very different from what kickstarts jobs, because we already have the jobs in the economy. They're just not formal, or they're not in enterprises which are productive, or they are not in sectors which are productive, or they earn skills which are not productive.
Yes, Mr. Bhargav, you want to come in? Yes, sir.
The only time I want to disagree with Manish, my good friend, is in this obsession with fiscal deficit. Frankly, all developing economies enhance, of course, will pay a price but interest. But if 200,000 crore by increasing fiscal deficit is put in an escrow account, which is meant only for capital expenditure investment in the infrastructure sector, Gadkari can make, instead of 60, 100 kilometers a day, we can do a lot more. I would vote for next 2 to 3 years, not irrational manner, but in a finite manner, certain departure from the fiscal deficit, Tamanna, dedicated to public investment will create a lot more jobs, lot more investment. Incidentally, when you invest, 30% comes back to you through GST and various income tax, etc. So really speaking, we should be a little more liberal and not be obsessed. There is nothing vulgar about a higher fiscal deficit.
Well, that's a whole different debate, which incidentally we had yesterday on the India development debate about whether it should be fiscal deficit or growth. We spoke about it. But Jaggi, I'm going to leave the last comments to you. 1 or 2 big focused promises or policy that can be laid out in this budget. Of course, we're hoping to see a larger vision for the next 5 years from the first budget as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have to shift our focus from just growth to job creating growth, and I mean growth needs to be the net result of productive jobs and productivity increasing in the economy. So the focus needs to shift from that top line of 7% GDP growth that we keep talking about, and look underneath at the plumbing that will create that kind of growth. So one big measure they should do is they should really go hammer and tongs to improve the apprentices scheme, makes it so liberal that people want to take on apprentices, because the best form of skilling happens on the job. It doesn't happen in ITIs or in some schools or colleges. It happens on the job. I mean, nothing is so skilled that you have to go to an IIT. I mean, 99% of the jobs are not those super skilled ones. It needs to be learned on the job. So most of our education is a waste because of that. If we can make that shift to make people, companies take on more apprentices, take them up by the million rather than the lakhs, I think you would have solved both the jobs creating problem and the skilling problem substantially. The second thing you need to do is you have to make states owners in this process of both skilling and growth and reducing what Manish calls regulatory cholesterol. Most of the cholesterol at the central level is probably reducing definitely, but at the state level, they are simply not conscious about it. I mean, most of the regulatory problems, including labor reforms, need to happen at the state level, but they're just sitting on their butts doing nothing. I mean, they think that the center will do everything, they only have to criticize the center. It's the states now that must drive growth. 62% of national resources are with the states. They have to get a move on.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a more complex debate about the role of the center or the state, and we'd love to get into it on another time, but here we're speaking just a couple of days in fact before the budget, so all eyes now on the finance minister and her maiden budget. I want to thank all of you for this wonderful conversation. I hope our viewers have also had a core takeaway from it, some excellent comments coming there from really the best in the business on the employment sector. Thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more.